Okay, in this example, taking it a step further than the previous example, you can think of a statement as also being a compound statement, a statement between curly brackets. So this gives us the functionality to then nest if-else statements. So we can have another if-else statement between curly brackets, as a compound statement. You can see here we have if some Boolean condition is true, then we have another if-else in between that. Now an else belongs to the preceding if, which does not already have an else. And we can circumvent this functionality by using compound statements, okay, as we'll see in this next example. So here we do not have compound statements, okay, and we will not have as we start the next example, but you'll see the problems that you might have with this, especially when it comes to readability. When you have a program where things are not indented properly, okay, it's difficult to follow and it can give you all kinds of issues. That's why I always recommend using compound statements. Quick example on nested if-else statements. So in this example, I have an integer called power level and I have that set to 9500. And here you can see if the power level is greater than 0 and if then the power level is also greater than 9000, then I print this out. And then I also have this else, where if the power level is equal to 0 or the same as 0, then I print this out. Otherwise I print out is a weakling attack, some dialog, for example. Okay, so the problem, if you can notice here, as I mentioned previously, indentation is very important. So here this else actually belongs to this inner if statement. This cannot be true, because if we have power level greater than 0, then, so if it's not greater than 9000, then it will go down here. Power level is the same as 0, so this will never be true because here we already have power level greater than 0. Okay, so it has to be greater than 0 for this to even take effect. So currently I have that set to 9500. I'll run this. You'll see his power level is over 9000. Set that to 0. And you can see nothing prints out to the console. That again is because this else part cannot be true. So how can we circumvent this problem? Well, one thing we can do is we can place this in a code block, or in other words, we can do a compound statement. So with this setup, again, the power level is 0. I'll run this and you'll see it's just a baby. So you can see that this a compound statement and the fact that this if now is in this block of code makes all of the difference. You can see this else now is part of this first if, and so when we set this to 0, this will be false, so it will not execute this block of code. It will go to the else part, and in the else we have an if statement that says if the power level is 0, then print this, which it did, otherwise it's going to print this. So if we set this to something like 500, run this, you can see we actually get nothing in this case. That is because it goes in here, it sees this is true, it's bigger than 0, okay, power level is greater than 0. It checks this, but this is false because it's only 500. And the problem here is that we don't have an else. So what I can do is I can copy this, Control C, Control V. Now if I do Control F5, you can see we get that. And also if you do a negative value, you see we also get is a weakling. So in this case it's going to be negative. So just to see the difference between this line and this line, I'll change this to something like that. Instead we win. If I run this now, that is what we should get. You can see. I would like to recommend that you place this between curly braces as well, so it's easier to read. You can see that works. Set that to 500 again. And now here's a weakling attack. Okay, that is greater than 0, so it will enter this line. Otherwise, if it's not greater than 0, then it will check. If it's equal to 0, it will print this. Otherwise, it's going to print something else. So we state, for example. So I just wanted to kind of highlight a few things to check out for in this silly example. And as you can see, we now have nested if-else statements. So here we have if, and then we have if-else again. And even in the else part, you have if-else again. Of course, I could have done something more mathematical or something like that, but I prefer these more silly gamified examples. Okay, so I hope this example makes sense to you. And I'll see you in the next section. Okay, remember from the previous video, we had the problem where if we set the health here to 0, then that will execute both this block here. So this if will evaluate it true, and this one will evaluate it true as well. So it will print both I'm dead and I'm dying at the same time. You can see we have this problem here. So one way of fixing this, before we move on, is by using nested if-else statements. So what I'll do is I'll cut and paste this if statement into this one right here. So let's see that. Okay, I'll do it like this. Pay attention to the indentation. Okay, you can see we have an if there and an if here. So this makes it easier to read, and this will print both of these out now anyway. So if I Control F5 to run this, you'll see it'll print both of these out anyway. And that's because what we need to do is we need to put this in here. So down here, we're not going to change this. So I have a few checks to do up here. Firstly, if my health is less than or equal to 25, then two things can happen. I can either be dead, because of course 0 is less than 25. And I can also be dying, so in need of a medipack. I can have a low health as a character. So I have to check for both of these things. Firstly, I'm checking whether or not I'm dead. If that is false, then it will execute this. In this case, I'm going to set my health to 0. This should be true. And so then this block will execute. It will not skip this. And then execution will move to over here. Health will be the same as 0. So it will print this. It will skip this, okay, because this section is true. It only executes this again if this here is false. And this part when this is true, if you remember from the previous video. So let's just see what happens. You can see I'm dead, and that's because again my health is 0. If I set that to something like 25, you can see I'm dying. I need a medipack. And the same for something like 15, health of 15. Right, I need a medipack. Okay, and of course we still have, let's say 36. Going to run that. And you see currently I don't print anything out when my health is 36. So I can add that in here somewhere maybe. And this is where we need to start talking about some of the other operators that we have, okay, before we can finish this block of code. Okay, so as you can see currently, if we set the health to 36, that is greater than 25, so none of this stuff will execute. And it's also less than here, less than 75, so this block will not execute. So again, if we want to say print something else out that says instead of I'm dying or I'm ready to fight, we can say I'm okay. To do that, we have to do a couple of checks as I mentioned. So what we'll do is we'll talk about logical operators, and then we'll come back to this problem.